Alright, so now we're on 2.6, and if you haven't already, I would recommend first that you watch 2.8. I have the 2.8 video up, and I know it's a little confusing, but watching 2.8 will make 2.6 a little bit more easy, okay? So if you haven't already, stop this, go to 2.8, and then come back to 2.6. So for 2.8, we're going to continue on with factoring. 2.6, we're going to continue on with factoring. So in 2.5, if you remember, we learned how to factor when we had three terms, x squared plus bx plus c. So what we did is we found two numbers that multiplied to be c and added to be b, right? And those made up our two factors. We had x and we had these two factors, x plus or minus something times by x plus or minus something. And these two numbers were numbers that multiplied to be c and added to be b, right? So the only thing that's different now is that we have this number right here. We have a number a that's outside of the variable being squared. So there are a couple different things that you can do to approach this, and that's what we're going to learn about in 2.6. So first, for number 1, you see that we have this 2 that's out in front of that. So what we want to do first is factor out a greatest common factor between all three terms. So can we do that? Is there something in common? And the answer is yes, they all can be factored, have a greatest common factor of 2. This number right here. So we can factor out a 2 from every single term. So if we take out the 2, so if we divide this by 2, we're just going to have c squared. If we divide this by 2, we'll have negative 7c. And if we divide this by 2, we should have negative 18. Okay. So notice here now that we have this 2 multiplied by this trinomial of degree 2, which now this we don't have an a number out in front of this right here. So now we can continue as we would before. Just remember that we have a 2 that's being multiplied by our polynomial. So what that means is, again, we write down what b is equal to. So b is equal to negative 7 and c is equal to negative 18. Okay, so now we have to take two numbers that multiply to be c and add to be b. So c is negative 18. So what are numbers that multiply to be negative 18? Well, that'd be 1 and 18. We'd have 2 and 9 and 3 and 6. I think that should be about it. And we want to find which pair of numbers add to be negative 7, which is b. So for that to happen, we'd have to have these two numbers right here, where we have negative 9 and positive 2. Because these two numbers multiply to be 18, but they add to be negative 7. Multiply to be negative 18 and add to be negative 7. So the only thing that's different here in this example is that we have this 2 right here. So now we have 2, and now we can write our factors. So that'd be c minus 9 and c plus 2, which were these two numbers right here. So that should be the first thing that you should do. That if you have a number, so like a number for number 3, we'll do the same in number 3. If you have a number outside of your variable that's being squared, then see if you can factor out this number from every single term. So in this case, 3 goes into 6 and 24, so we can factor out the 3. So we factor out the 3, then we have x squared. This divided by 3 would be minus 2x. 24 divided by 3 would be minus 8. Alright, so 3 times by x squared minus 2x minus 8. And then proceed as you normally would. So we know b is equal to negative 2 and c is equal to negative 8. So we want to find two numbers that multiply to be negative 8 and add to be negative 2. So multiple factors of 8 are 1 and 8 and 2 and 4. Now, which two pairs of these numbers would multiply to be negative 8 and add to be negative 2? So that means one of them has to be negative, right? So right here, it would have to be negative 4 and positive 2. So those are the factors. So it would be x minus 4 and then x plus 2, but then don't forget that we have this 3 out here, times by 3. So there you go. That would be the answer right there. That's how you factor completely. Let's try and do one more. So you could do the same with number 2, 4, 5, and 6. Let's do number 5 together, and you can do 2, 4, and 6 on your own for practice if you want. So right here, can we factor out this number from all three terms? And that is a yes, we can. We can take out the 5, and then we'd be left with s squared plus 11s plus 10. Now, inside here, b is equal to 11, c is equal to 10. Now take 10 and list out its factors, so that'd be 1 and 10, 2 and 5. Do any of these pairs of numbers add to be 11? So that would have to be 1 and 10. So then we'd have s plus 1 and s plus 10. And then we have this 5 out here. 5. Oops, 5. Okay, and just be as easy as that. Okay, now let's jump to 7, 9, and 7, 8, and 9. And let's actually focus on number 8 right here. Because here's the thing for number 8, and for all of these questions right here, is that this number right here, the a value, you can't factor it out from this or from this right here. So we can't find, there's no greatest common factor between these three terms. Okay, and this is why I wanted you to watch number 2.8 before you came here, and I'll show you why. So first of all, do the same thing. We know a is equal to 6, we know b is equal to negative 11, and we know c is equal to 4. So before, what we wanted to do is find two numbers that multiplied to be c and add to be b. The only thing different here now is we want to find two numbers that multiply to be a times c but add to be b. So multiply a and c together. So that's going to be 6 times by 4, and that's equal to negative 24. Okay? And then b is equal to equal to 24. So we have 24 and negative 11. So we want to find two numbers that multiply to be 24, which was a times by c, and add to be 11. So let's take 24, and let's find the factors of 24. So that's going to be 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. Okay? So these are numbers that multiply to be a times by c. Now let's think about a pair that add to be negative 11. So in that case, it would have to be this right here, where it'd be negative 3 and negative 8. Because together they multiply to be positive 24, but add to be negative 11. So this is where things would be a little bit differently, okay? So now, what we want to do is we want to rewrite our equation that we have up here. And we're going to rewrite it using these two numbers. So let's write down 6k squared. That's for sure. That we know that we have that. But now, instead of writing negative 11k, we're going to write minus 3k minus 8k plus 4, which is the last term. So we did that. These are the two numbers right here, right? These are our two numbers. negative 3k and negative 8k. Now together they make negative 11k, which is what we have in our original equation. So we actually didn't really change our equation, we're just writing it differently. Okay. So now this is why we watched 2.8 first, because in 2.8 you learned how to factor by grouping. We learned how to factor when there were 4 terms. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. So now we can factor by grouping, where we factor by pairs. So for the first half, we want to factor the first half first. So factor out the greatest common factor between these two numbers. So we have, or these two terms. So we have 6k squared minus 3k. Now we can factor out a 3k because they both have a 3k in common. So when we do 6k squared divided by 3k, we have 2k. And then 3k divided by 3k, our common factor, would just be minus 1. And now we go on to the next two terms, which is minus 8k and positive 4. What do these two terms have in common? So drop your sign that we have here, which is minus, and they both have a 4 in common. So take out the 4. Now, what do we have left? Well, 8k divided by 4 would be 2k. But remember that we took out the negative, so now this sign right here is going to be negative. We're going to flip that sign in the middle. So now this is going to be minus, and then this term, 4 divided by our greatest common factor, 4, would be 1. Okay, so now we have 3k times by 2k minus 1 minus 4 times by 2k minus 1. So now we have two terms, and they have a common binomial factor, which is 2k minus 1. So we can factor out the common binomial term. So 2k minus 1 is the common binomial factor. So when you factor that out, when you take out the 2k minus 1 from here, you're just left with 3k. And when you take out the 2k minus 1 from this term, you're just left with negative 4. And there you go. That's how you factor that. So a little bit different from what we did before, but kind of similar as well. So we just have to turn it into a factor by grouping situation. So let's try number 9 together. So for number 9, let's write A, which is equal to 9, B, which is equal to 9, and C, which is equal to 2. A times C is equal to 9 times by 2, which is equal to 18. So we need to find two numbers that multiply to be 18 and add to be 9. So factors of 18 are 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. So which of these pair of numbers add to be B, which is 9? That would have to be positive 3 and positive 6. Now let's rewrite this equation right here, where we have 9w squared, but instead of 9w, we're going to write it as 3w and 6w. So plus 3w plus 6w plus 2. Okay, now factor by grouping. So let's take the first two pairs of terms that we have. These both have a 3w in common, so take out the 3w. 9w squared divided by 3w will be 3w, and then 3w divided by 3w, which would be positive 1. Okay, so I factored out the 3w from both of these terms. Now I have a plus right here. Now I have 6w and positive 2. The greatest common factor between these two terms would be 2. And then 6w divided by 2 would be 3w. 2 divided by 2 would be 1, so plus 1. Okay, so now we have 3w times by 3w plus 1 plus 2 times by 3w plus 1. Now you see that they both have a common binomial factor of 3w plus 1, so take those out. So 3w plus 1. So when we take out a 3w plus 1 from the first term, we'll be left with just 3w. And from the second term, we'll be left with positive 2. And that would be your answer right there. So a lot of practice will hopefully make all this make a little bit more sense. But I hope you're seeing what we're doing here. So let's just keep doing a lot of practice, which is why I have a bunch of problems here. It's for us to practice a lot. So let's try actually doing number 13 right here. Because notice here that we have a negative 12 now. So a is negative. So we don't want a to be negative. So what we do is we can factor out the negative first. So factor out the negative. So if you factor out the negative, that changes the signs of everything inside. So now this is going to be 12b squared minus 5b minus 2. Okay. Now proceed as you normally would. So if you see a negative out here, factor it out first. So now a is equal to 12, b is equal to negative 5, and c is equal to negative 2. A times c is equal to 12 times negative 2, which is equal to negative 24. So find two numbers that multiply to be negative 24 and add to be b. So take negative 24, list out as factors, so that would be 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. Now what two numbers here add to be negative 5, keeping in mind that one of these numbers has to be negative. Because that's how you get negative 24. So that would have to mean it would have to be 3 and 8, where you have negative 8 and then positive 3. Negative 8 times by positive 3 is negative 24, but negative 8 plus 3 is negative 5. So these are the two numbers. So we want to rewrite what we have here, but also remember that we have a negative outside here. So if we have negative, we have 12b squared, and instead of negative 5b, we're going to write negative 8b plus 3b minus 2. Keep in mind that this together equals negative 5b. Okay. So now factor by grouping, but just remember that we have the negative outside. Always remember that we have the negative outside. So right here, we can factor out a 4b. So remember we have the negative outside. So we have negative. So if we factor out a 4, which is what they have in common, take out the 4b. And then if we divide that by 4b, we have 3b, and then minus 2. So keep the plus sign there. Now we can't factor out anything. The greatest common factor between 3b and minus 2 is just 1, so plus 1. And then we just have 3b minus 2. So notice here that this is a common binomial factor. So we can factor that out. Remember that we have the negative outside. So we have 3b minus 2. And when we take out the 3b minus 2 from the first term, we have 4b. And we take out the 3b minus 2 from the second term, we have positive 1. And there you go. And that's how you factor those two. So you notice here that whenever a is negative, that you're going to have a negative sign outside there. Okay. So hopefully this is making sense. Let's try and do number 16 for one last practice problem. Hopefully you guys are able to do the rest on your own. So again, this is a negative, so factor out the negative first. So when you take out the negative, it flips the sign of everything right here. So that's going to be 2d squared plus d minus 6. A is equal to 2, b is equal to 1, c is equal to negative 6. A times c is equal to 2 times negative 6, which is equal to negative 12. So two numbers that multiply to be negative 12 and add to be 1. So that if we take factors of 12, we have 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. Now, which one of these two numbers multiply to be negative 12 and add to be 1? So they would have to be negative 4, positive 3. So rewrite everything, keeping in mind that we have the negative outside. So we have negative 2d squared, and instead of positive d, this is a positive d, not a negative one, sorry. So that means, let me go back, this would have to be positive 4, and then negative 3. So positive d, so that means we have to do plus 4d minus 3d minus 6. Okay? So now factor by grouping. So we have a negative outside here. Now from here we can factor out a 2d from these two terms right here. So factor out the 2d. So that means you'll be left with d. Because if you take out 2d from here, you'll just be left with d. And if you take out the 2d from here, you'll be left with plus 2. Drop your sign here, that's negative. Now we can take out a 3 from 3d and 6, so take out the 3. So that's going to be d. Now it's no longer going to be minus right here, because we took out the minus over here. So now it's going to be positive. And then positive 6 divided by 3 is 2. Alright. So we have a negative sign, and we have a common binomial factor of d plus 2. So we can take out the d plus 2. So when we take out the d plus 2 from the first term, we're left with 2d. And from the second term, we're left with minus 3. And there you go. Okay, so hopefully you were able to follow along. I'd recommend doing these practice problems, but you'll also get a lot of practice problems from doing the homework. So I hope this was helpful. If it doesn't make sense, make sure you email me or you come to class, and we'll talk about it then. So I'll see you guys in class. See ya.